A homeless boy hands Keanu Reeves a napkin with a sketch of his face, then vanishes. Days later, Keanu discovers a chilling message hidden on the back. "Help me. It's not safe." Now he must race against time to find the boy before it's too late. But what Keanu uncovers will haunt him forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sun hung low over downtown Los Angeles, casting long golden streaks across the sidewalk as the afternoon buzzed with its usual mix of noise and movement. Cars rolled steadily through the intersections. Waiters bustled in and out of small cafes. Artists displayed their canvases on street corners, hoping to sell just one painting before nightfall. Keanu Reeves stepped out of a cozy, tucked-away cafe on 3rd Street, where he had just wrapped up a casual meeting with 2 close friends. They had talked about upcoming film ideas, motorcycles, and life in general, the usual blend of laughter, quiet moments, and thoughtful exchanges that came with knowing people for decades. Keanu adjusted the collar of his soft black jacket, holding his cup of coffee as the warm breeze tugged gently at the edges of his sleeves. He had always been someone who tried to remain grounded, even as the world constantly reminded him of his fame. He appreciated quiet corners like this cafe, places where he could exist without being surrounded by flashing cameras or people begging for autographs. Still, even amid a rare moment of peace, his eyes stayed observant. It wasn't out of caution, it was habit. A habit of noticing things most others ignored. That was when he saw him. Across the street, nestled between a parking meter and a rusted lamppost, a young boy sat hunched on the sidewalk. He couldn't have been older than 12. His clothes were 2 sizes too big, frayed at the edges and smudged with dirt. His sneakers had holes. His hands were slender, fingers calloused, the nails worn down from use. But what struck Keanu wasn't the boy's appearance, it was his focus. The boy was sketching something on his lap, head down, brows furrowed in total concentration. The noise of the city didn't touch him. The motion of people walking by didn't exist to him. He was lost in the world he was creating, with nothing more than a stub of pencil and a crumpled napkin. Keanu froze for a second on the curb, heart nudged by something he couldn't explain. This wasn't a street performer putting on a show for tourists. This was something else. There was a stillness to the boy, a kind of silent urgency. He didn't glance around. He didn't ask for money. He didn't even seem to notice the cars speeding by a few feet from his shoulder. He just drew. Without saying a word, Keanu crossed the street. Not quickly, not like someone rushing to interrupt. Just quietly, naturally, like he'd been pulled there by something deeper than curiosity. He stopped a few feet away, unsure if the boy had even noticed him. Then, as if he had sensed Keanu's presence the whole time, the boy looked up. He didn't smile, he didn't speak. He simply stood, held out the napkin, and extended it with both hands. "For you," he said. Keanu took the napkin gently, his fingers brushing against the boy's for a second. He looked down. His breath caught. It was a portrait, his portrait. The lines were swift but exact. The shading, despite being done with a dull pencil on a napkin, created shadows across his cheekbones, the curve of his jaw, the softness around his eyes. But what stood out wasn't just the technical skill. It was the emotion. The expression captured in the sketch wasn't just a reflection of what Keanu looked like. It was something deeper. The portrait carried weight. Like the boy had somehow seen through him, straight into a part of himself that he usually kept hidden. Pain, strength, loneliness, kindness. It was all there, in graphite and napkin fibers. Keanu crouched slightly to be at eye level. He offered a small smile. "This is incredible," he said, voice soft. "Thank you." The boy didn't reply. His lips parted slightly, like he wanted to say something else, but the moment passed. Without another word, he turned around and stepped into the foot traffic behind him. 1, 2, 3 people passed between them, and then he was gone, swallowed by the city as if he had never been there to begin with. Keanu stood there, holding the napkin in both hands. For a moment he thought about chasing after the boy, asking him his name, slipping him a few bills, but something stopped him. Maybe he didn't want to disrupt whatever the boy's purpose had been. Maybe he thought the gesture was enough. Or maybe, just maybe, he assumed the boy had everything under control. He looked down at the drawing again. Then he carefully folded it in half and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. A voice behind him broke the quiet. "What was that about?" asked one of his friends, who had followed him across the street. Keanu looked back, still slightly dazed. "I think that kid just gave me one of the best portraits I've ever received." The friend leaned in, glanced at the corner of the napkin sticking out from Keanu's pocket. "Really? You get painted by world-class artists all the time?" Keanu nodded. "Yeah, but this one, it's different." They stood there a moment longer before turning back toward the cafe to grab their things. Keanu said little on the walk to his motorcycle. He was quiet in the way someone becomes when something unexpected reaches inside and stirs up an old memory, a long forgotten ache. He didn't know the boy's name, didn't know where he had gone, but the look in those eyes, the quiet urgency, that would stay with him. That night, Keanu returned to his home tucked away in the hills just above Sunset Boulevard. It was a modest place by Hollywood standards. Open, quiet, warm with earth tones and natural wood. The kind of place designed for reflection. He shrugged off his jacket and hung it on a coat rack near the front door, the napkin sketch still inside its pocket, nearly forgotten amid the gentle rhythm of his evening routine. He heated up a bowl of soup, fed his dog, and sat on the couch, television on but unwatched. His mind kept circling back to the boy. There was something odd about the whole thing. Not bad, just offbeat. The kind of moment that stayed in your ribs. Keanu had met countless people in his life. Talented strangers, struggling fans, children who cried just being near him. But this boy hadn't asked for a selfie, hadn't said, "I love your movies," hadn't even smiled. He had offered a portrait, nothing more. Like he had shown up with a mission and then disappeared. Keanu leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. That image, the boy's face, the way he'd held out the napkin like it was all he had left to give, it lingered. Eventually he stood, yawned, and prepared for bed. As he reached to turn off the light in the living room, his gaze fell on the jacket he had worn earlier. Something nudged at him, a feeling. He walked over, slipped his hand into the pocket, and pulled out the folded napkin again. He unfolded it, smoothing the creases gently on the coffee table. The drawing stared back at him. Even under soft lamplight, the detail in the sketch was breathtaking. Keanu smiled, shaking his head. How could someone so young, living on the streets, capture something so intimate, so human, without ever exchanging more than a few words? He stared at the sketch for another minute, then folded it carefully and placed it back in the pocket. He figured he'd keep it, maybe even frame it one day. He didn't see the back of the napkin, not yet. He didn't see the faint lines scratched into the fibers, nearly invisible to the naked eye, scrawled with a desperation so subtle it had gone unnoticed until now. Not yet. For now, the sketch was just a remarkable piece of art, a small act of kindness from a boy he didn't know. But in just a few days, that same napkin would lead Keanu on a journey more dangerous and heartbreaking than anything he had faced before. And what he would uncover, hidden behind that single wordless sketch, would shake everything he believed about the world and about himself. 3 days passed. The napkin sketch remained tucked safely in the same coat pocket where Keanu had left it. Life, as it always did, moved on with quiet urgency. He went about his routines, reading scripts, taking long rides along Mulholland Drive, checking in on a friend's charity project. But every so often, without warning, the boy's face flashed in his memory, that intense focus while sketching, those dark eyes that said more than any words could, and each time Keanu felt something inside shift. A pressure. A tug he couldn't explain. That morning, the weather had shifted. A heavy mist clung to the city, wrapping the skyline in gray. Keanu stood in his foyer, slipping on the same black coat he had worn that day outside the cafe. As he lifted it off the rack, something fluttered from the inner pocket and drifted silently to the hardwood floor. He looked down. The napkin. It had unfolded slightly on its way down, landing face down, with one corner curling upward. He bent to pick it up, intending only to refold it and slide it back into place. But as he lifted it toward the light, something caught his eye. The back of the napkin wasn't blank. At first, he thought it was just a stain, something smudged from handling, but when he tilted it beneath the nearby floor lamp, a series of faint lines appeared, etched so lightly they were almost invisible. His heart thumped. He stepped closer to the light and squinted, adjusting the angle. There, scratched with trembling strokes, were 4 shaky words. "Help me. Not safe. Please." Keanu stood frozen. The words were barely there, as though the boy had written them quickly, nervously, knowing they might be discovered but hoping they wouldn't be ignored. The letters looked like they had been written with the same pencil he had used for the sketch, but pressed in urgently, like he hadn't had time to go over them again. Keanu stared, his chest tightening. He read them again. "Help me. Not safe. Please." In an instant, everything shifted. The napkin wasn't just art. It was a message, a silent cry for help. And he hadn't seen it. All this time, it had been sitting there in his pocket while the boy, wherever he was, might have been waiting. Or worse. Memories surged. Not memories of recent years, but old, buried ones. Of being young. Of wandering city streets alone. Of rooms that were too quiet and nights that were too long. Of being overlooked. Keanu knew that feeling too well. And now it was happening again. To someone else. Someone he had touched on the shoulder. Someone who had silently reached out. And he had walked away. He didn't waste another second. Grabbing his keys and phone, Keanu threw on his jacket and headed straight for the door. The house felt colder now, quieter, like it too was holding its breath. He moved fast, boots echoing down the stairs, then out into the thick morning fog that blanketed the hills. His motorcycle growled to life beneath him. He didn't check the time, didn't make any calls. There was only one thought racing through his head. Go back, find him, retrace the steps. Maybe someone saw where he went. Maybe he wasn't too late. As the engine roared beneath him, he flew down the canyon roads, weaving between early traffic and intersections that blurred in streaks of color. The city below was just beginning to wake, unaware of the urgency vibrating through every cell in his body. Back downtown, Keanu parked just a block away from the cafe. He stood for a moment on the sidewalk where he had first seen the boy. The lamppost was still there, so was the parking meter. People passed by without noticing the spot, without knowing that something important had happened here, that a child had cried for help with a pencil instead of a voice. Keanu scanned every inch of the street. No sign of the boy. He crossed over to the cafe, pausing at the spot where the boy had handed him the napkin. His memory painted the image so vividly. The tattered hoodie, the shoelaces dragging, the small smudge of pencil lead on the boy's knuckle. He looked around. Nothing. The same barista was working behind the counter. Keanu walked in and gently asked if she remembered the boy. She blinked, apologetic. "So many people come and go," she said. She didn't recall. He left without ordering anything. He checked the alleyway beside the cafe, then the bookstore down the street, where artists sometimes gathered. He peeked into narrow spaces between buildings. He even called out once or twice, quietly, embarrassed by how little he knew. He had nothing. No name, no age. Just a face, a napkin, and 4 desperate words. A man sweeping the sidewalk next door looked up at him, curious. "Hey," Keanu said gently, "you ever see a kid out here? Sketching? Real talented." The man frowned, shook his head. "Don't think so." He showed the napkin. Recognition didn't flash in the man's eyes, just confusion. Keanu nodded a quiet thank you and kept walking. The city was moving on, as it always did, but something told Keanu that if he didn't act now, if he didn't find the next clue soon, it might be too late. The boy hadn't asked for anything, not food, not money. He had only asked to be seen, and even that had taken everything he had left. Keanu continued searching for hours. He walked blocks. He didn't usually walk. Checked bus stops, passed every alley in a 5-block radius. The noise of the city grew louder, people pressing past him with no idea what he was carrying in his chest. He scanned benches, stoops, the base of every stairwell, hoping to spot the boy's narrow frame, the mop of uncombed hair, the dirt-stained cuffs of his sleeves. But there was nothing. He found himself staring at corners longer than necessary, half expecting the boy to reappear just like he had the first time. Silent, present, holding something drawn from pain and talent and hope all at once. The further Keanu walked, the more the helplessness sank in. He pulled out the napkin again and stared at the words. "Help me. Not safe. Please." Why hadn't he turned it over that day? Why hadn't he asked the boy more? It wasn't guilt. It was something deeper. Regret mixed with urgency. A sense that maybe, just maybe, he had been the only one that boy had ever trusted. The only one he had dared to reach out to, and Keanu had missed it. He paced along a narrow sidewalk and leaned against a lamppost, closing his eyes for a second. He tried to remember the boy's face in more detail, the sound of his voice, the way he held his pencil. Every detail might matter now, because somewhere in this city a child might be waiting. Or worse, might already be gone. Then it came to him. The alley near the bookstore. There had been a small corner with a dumpster and a piece of cardboard propped against the brick wall. He remembered seeing it out of the corner of his eye that day. He hadn't thought anything of it at the time. He turned and walked back quickly, cutting across the street and slipping behind the bookstore. The alley was still there, the dumpster, the corner. No one was there now, but it felt familiar, like something had lingered here, a presence, a person, Keanu scanned the ground, trash, leaves, broken plastic. He bent down, brushing away a damp flyer. Nothing. But then, half hidden under a tattered pizza box, he saw something. A corner of paper. He pulled it free. It was part of a sketch. Rough, torn, rushed, but clearly drawn by the same hand. Keanu turned it over. No words this time, but there was a drawing of a building, a fence, a symbol that looked like a broken cross. That wasn't just a sketch. It was a clue, a breadcrumb. The boy had left him a trail. And now, Keanu realized with growing certainty, he might be the boy's only chance. Keanu stood in the alley, the torn sketch in his hand trembling slightly from the wind, or maybe from the weight of what it meant. The faint outlines of a building, a tall fence, and that strange symbol. A cross, but not whole, spread across the rough page like a riddle drawn in haste. He studied it under the dim afternoon light, trying to memorize the angles, the proportions, the tiny details that might point to something real. He took out his phone and snapped a picture, zooming in, then turned the sketch over to see if there were any other markings. Nothing. But something about it felt intentional. This wasn't just a piece of art. The boy had left it behind on purpose, hidden but not buried. It was meant to be found. Keanu folded it carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, the same pocket where the napkin had been, as if that space on his chest had become something more than fabric and lining, a place for burdens no one else had noticed. Back on the sidewalk, he resumed his search with a renewed sense of purpose. His instincts pushed him beyond the typical places. This wasn't just about checking one more street corner. This was about following a whisper of hope through the noise of a city that had long stopped listening. He went back to the cafe and asked again, this time more persistently. The barista still didn't recall the boy. Neither did the hostess at the restaurant next door. He walked to the row of street artists who lined the block with folding tables and portrait boards, hoping one of them had noticed a small boy sketching on the sidewalk just days ago. Each one shook their head. Keanu thanked them, his voice calm but tighter with each response. The search had turned into a blur of questions and dead ends, and still he kept going. A corner vendor selling newspapers and hot dogs didn't recognize the boy. A woman painting miniature landscapes for tourists didn't either. By late afternoon, the edges of frustration began to seep into his movements. He could feel the urgency rising, curling in his chest like smoke, with nowhere to escape. He wasn't panicking, but he was close. This wasn't a script. There wasn't a second take. And then, outside a small thrift shop, he spotted someone different. An older man sat beneath a weathered umbrella, surrounded by crates of paperbacks, magazines, and chipped ceramic cups. He looked like someone who had seen decades of this city come and go. Keanu approached quietly and held up the napkin drawing again. The man blinked. His eyes narrowed slightly behind thick, yellowed glasses. "You're the one he drew," the man said, his voice dry as sand. Keanu leaned in. "You saw him?" The man nodded slowly. "Yeah. Quiet little artist. Didn't say much. Slept back behind the dumpster 2 nights, maybe 3. Keanu stepped closer, crouching a little to meet the man's eye level. "Do you know where he went?" The vendor shook his head, adjusting his cap. "Gone now. Just disappeared. Nobody saw who took him. Some say he left on his own, but I don't buy that. Kids like that, they vanish too fast, too quiet." Keanu's pulse quickened. "Was he alone?" The vendor sighed. "Always. Never asked for a thing, just drew, sometimes on napkins, sometimes cardboard. Sat like a ghost. Looked scared though, real scared." Keanu pressed his hand into his pocket, feeling the edge of the torn sketch inside. "Did you notice anything strange the last time you saw him?" The man glanced over his shoulder, then pointed subtly down the alley. "The night before he disappeared, 2 men came by, big guys. One of them checked behind the dumpster. Didn't talk to me, didn't buy anything, just looked around. Did they take him?" "I didn't see that," vendor replied carefully. "But I didn't see the boy again after that, so maybe..." Keanu's jaw tightened. "Did they say anything? Have any markings? Anything at all?" The man hesitated, then he scratched his beard. "Yeah. One of them had a patch, looked like a cross, but broken, like split down the middle." Keanu's heart nearly stopped. He pulled the torn sketch from his pocket and unfolded it. "Like this?" The man looked, eyes hardening. "Exactly like that." Keanu stood up slowly. The symbol wasn't just random, it was real, connected to something bigger, something dangerous. A brand. A mark. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a few bills. He handed them to the vendor, who took them with a nod but said nothing more. Whatever this was, he didn't want to get involved. Keanu understood that. Not everyone had the power to run into darkness, but he did. And now he knew where to go. He walked to the dumpster the man had mentioned. It was tucked between 2 brick walls, shadowed by fire escapes. Empty now, no sketch pads, no blankets, just trash and the sour smell of decay. But he crouched anyway and looked carefully. Beneath a flattened soda can, he found the corner of another drawing, torn, smudged, bent at the edge. He peeled it away from the pavement. It was another quick sketch. This one showed more than just objects. It showed a scene, a long fence, a tower-like building, a tree line behind it, and just above the fence line, in one corner of the drawing, was that same broken cross. The same one on the napkin, the same one on the jacket. It wasn't art. It was a message, a map. Keanu took a long breath and stood. He folded the new sketch and placed it beside the first in his jacket pocket. 2 clues, 2 drawings, 1 cry for help. This boy, whoever he was, had been trying to leave a trail, not out of hope, but out of desperation. And it had worked, because someone had finally followed it. He stepped out of the alley and looked back one more time. That little space behind the dumpster was cold, stained, and silent. But it had been the boy's shelter, his refuge, maybe his last safe place. And now it was just a gap between buildings, holding the echo of someone who might be slipping further from reach with every passing hour. Keanu's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was his assistant, reminding him of an afternoon interview. He ignored it and slipped the phone back into his jacket. The industry could wait. This couldn't. He walked several blocks, following a rhythm in his memory, retracing the way the boy had moved that day. Keanu tried to imagine being that small, that vulnerable, with nothing but a pencil and the courage to draw your way toward safety. He thought about the way the boy had looked at him, not with awe, not with fan energy, but with something else. Keanu's steps grew faster. He started scanning architecture now. Fences, barbed wire, gray buildings that might match the shape in the drawing. He snapped photos, compared them on his phone. None were close enough. But he knew he was getting warmer. This city was filled with places the public had forgotten. Old schools, shelters, storage yards, and orphanages too. The broken cross wasn't just some dark artistic flourish. It was real. A symbol of a group. Maybe a place. Maybe something worse. Keanu kept moving, slipping the drawings out every few minutes, checking shapes and lines. He didn't have a destination yet, but he had direction. The kind of direction you can only feel when something inside won't let you stop. By the time the sun began to sink below the skyline, he had walked for hours. His legs ached, his throat was dry. But he didn't slow down. At a corner convenience store, he paused for water. The cashier asked if he was okay. Keanu nodded. Just looking for someone. He didn't explain more. That night, back home, he spread both sketches out on the table beside the napkin. He stared at them under the lamp, matching lines, rotating angles, trying to decode the pattern. Then it clicked. The buildings weren't random. They were drawn from memory, like the boy had seen them before, maybe even lived there. Keanu sat back, fingers resting lightly on the paper. This wasn't over. This was only the beginning. He made a silent promise to himself. He would not stop until he found the boy. Not just because of what he had seen, but because of what he hadn't. The things that had remained unspoken, hidden, waiting in the shadows. The sun had long vanished behind the buildings by the time Keanu Reeves stepped out onto the dimly lit streets again. The city had changed. The light was gone. The heat had faded. And with the darkness came the version of Los Angeles most people chose not to see. The shadows where the forgotten lived, where the noises were different, and where cries for help never reached the surface. Keanu walked with purpose now, the boy's portrait folded carefully into his pocket. He had printed out a clearer version of the napkin drawing at home, enlarged it, smoothed it, and now he carried it with him like a beacon. A question in physical form, one he would ask again and again. He stopped at the first shelter on 8th Street. It was run down, a place that had once received funding but had since slipped through the cracks. Keanu approached a man sitting on the steps, wrapped in layers of coats despite the mild weather. "Excuse me," Keanu said gently. I'm looking for someone." The man didn't look up. Keanu crouched and unfolded the portrait. "Have you seen this boy? Small, maybe 12, good with a pencil, quiet." The man blinked slowly, then shook his head. "Nah, not around here." Keanu stood and thanked him anyway. The next stop was under the overpass near Alameda. A cluster of tents formed a fragile community. Keanu stepped carefully, calling out gently as he moved between them. A few people peered from their tarps. Others ignored him completely. He showed the portrait again and again. Each time he hoped for something. A flicker of recognition, a glance too long, a nod. But for the first hour, there was nothing. The city swallowed stories like the sea swallowed stones. People came and went in these places, and a child without a name, without a voice, could disappear faster than anyone would admit. At the corner of 3rd and Rose, he found a man sitting cross-legged beside a plastic crate filled with books. The man looked up at him warily. Keanu offered the drawing. "Please, this is important." The man took it, held it close to the small light clipped to his crate. He studied it longer than the others had, then shook his head. "Can't say I've seen him, but try the bridge, down on 4th. Kids hide out there sometimes." It wasn't much, but it was something. Keanu nodded and headed east. Every second felt heavier now. He couldn't explain it, but it felt like time was thinning, like the window to find the boy was closing fast. By the time he reached the bridge encampment, the night had thickened. The concrete above cast deep shadows. Fires burned in metal drums. A few voices echoed under the massive structure, bouncing against steel and stone. He stepped into the gloom, the portrait still in hand. A few pairs of eyes followed him as he moved through the encampment. Some watched with suspicion, others with indifference. He walked slowly, respectfully, showing the sketch to those willing to look. Most shook their heads. One woman muttered something in Spanish and turned away. Finally, near the farthest barrel fire, a woman wrapped in 3 coats and a fraying scarf glanced at the paper longer than the rest. Her skin was weathered, her eyes sharp beneath tired lids. Keanu approached cautiously. "You recognize him?" She stared at the sketch again, then gave a small nod. "Yeah, I seen him." His heart jumped. "When?" "Couple nights back, maybe 3? Was he alone?" She nodded slowly. "Always was. Real quiet, never talked much, just sat by himself, drawing on old napkins or scraps of paper. Good kid." "Too good for this place." Keanu knelt beside her. "Do you know where he went?" The woman hesitated, then leaned closer. "Somebody took him." Keanu's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Came in a van, no license plate. 2 men, big, didn't talk to anyone, just walked right over to where the boy was sleeping. Woke him up. He tried to run, but they grabbed him." Keanu's hands curled into fists. "Did anyone try to stop them?" "No one here wants that kind of trouble. We see things, but we don't always say." He swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice calm. "Did the men say anything?" She nodded again. "One of them had a jacket with a patch. Looked like a cross, but broke." The words hit like ice. That symbol again. It wasn't just in the drawing. It was real. A mark. A signature. A threat. Keanu pulled out the second sketch, the one from behind the dumpster. He held it next to the portrait. "Did he ever show you something like this?" The woman leaned forward, squinting at the torn page. "Yeah, that's what he was drawing the night before they came. He had a few of those. Said he was trying to remember, like he was mapping something." "Mapping?" "Told me, if I don't make it, someone has to find it. I thought he was just dreaming, you know? Like kids do. Didn't know it was real." Keanu looked at her for a long moment. There was something in her eyes. Guilt mixed with fear. He reached into his wallet, pulled out all the cash he had, and offered it to her. She shook her head. "I don't want money. I just want someone to care." Keanu's voice was soft. "I do. I won't stop." She nodded once. "Then be careful. Whatever took him, It's bigger than people like us. Keanu walked away from the firelight, the weight in his chest growing heavier with every step. The woman's warning echoed in his ears. It's bigger than people like us. He wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but the way she said it made the air colder. He reached his motorcycle parked at the edge of the bridge, climbed on, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. His reflection stared back at him from the side mirror. Worn, tense, focused. The napkin sketch had been the start. Now he had a van with no plates. 2 men with a broken cross on their jackets, and a child taken in the night. He thought about the way the boy had handed him the portrait, so quietly, as if it was all he had, and maybe it was. A single moment of hope offered to a stranger who might care enough to do something. Keanu had missed the warning then. He wouldn't miss the next one. The engine came to life, low and steady. He pulled out slowly from the curb, tires humming softly beneath him. The city around him sparkled with neon signs and street lamps, but none of it felt alive. Not tonight. He drove past the familiar landmarks, the old theaters, the record store where he used to browse alone, the corner newsstand still somehow open, and kept going, past all the lights and into the parts of the city where the broken cross might still cast a shadow. His mind turned over possibilities. Could the symbol be tied to an abandoned property? A gang, a trafficking ring? Was it something older? He didn't know, but he knew how to start. He'd talked to someone who did. He pulled to a stop at a red light and took out his phone, snapping a photo of the symbol on the second sketch. Then he sent it to a friend, an investigative journalist he'd worked with once on a charity expose. No message, just the image. She'd know what it meant, or she'd know who to ask. The light turned green, and he rolled forward again. Keanu wasn't law enforcement, he wasn't a trained investigator, but he had something that couldn't be taught. He cared, and when he cared, he didn't stop. He passed another shelter and glanced toward its entrance. Maybe tomorrow he'd stop there too. He'd keep asking, keep showing the boy's face, keep knocking on doors no one wanted to open. Because now he understood. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a race. A race against people who thrived in silence. A race to bring light into places that had long forgotten what light even was. And he was already running. Morning broke with a dull sky hanging low over Los Angeles. The clouds were thick, casting a gray hue over the city, but Keanu barely noticed. He had been up since dawn, reviewing the 2 sketches over and over again, hoping that a night's rest would help him see something he missed. But they were the same, still raw, still urgent, still pointing towards something just out of reach. He knew he needed another pair of eyes, someone who could see past the obvious, someone who had lived a life inside lines and shadows and structure. He pulled out his phone and sent a message to one person he trusted completely, Jules Samara, an old friend from the indie film circuit who had once been an art consultant before turning to set design. Jules had the kind of vision that could break down a single pencil stroke and tell you if the artist was hungry, tired, or crying when they made it. The response came quickly. Bring it over. Keanu rode across town, weaving through mid-morning traffic until he reached a second-floor studio tucked above a used bookstore in Silver Lake. Jules had lived and worked there for years, a place filled with canvases stacked against the walls, dried paint covering the floor, and the scent of turpentine hanging permanently in the air. He entered without knocking. Jules was already at the large wooden drafting table, cleaning off space. They wore thick-rimmed glasses, a paint-streaked hoodie, and had the kind of intensity that made every word feel like a statement. You brought something strange, Jules said without looking up. Keanu placed the sketches on the table, smoothing them carefully. Jules leaned over them, eyes narrowing. Wow, they murmured, fingers tracing the fence lines, then the faint silhouette of the building. Who drew these? Keanu hesitated. A boy. I don't know his name, but he's missing. Jules didn't ask more. They never did. Instead, they studied in silence, eyes moving across each line as if reading a language no one else spoke. "This isn't just some drawing," Jules finally said. "This is memory. These are drawn from real sight. See the way the fence curls here? That's chain link, but it's topped with barbed wire. Not just any kind. That twist, double coil. High security fencing. Usually surrounds government property, detention centers, maybe old institutions." Keanu nodded slowly. "I thought it might be something like that." Jules pointed to the left side of the sketch. "Look here. Window formation. That's not residential. Too uniform. No commercial signage either. You're looking at an institutional layout." Keanu leaned closer. "What kind?" Jules sat back. "Could be juvenile detention, or maybe an old group home, something no longer in use." Keanu's heart beat faster. He unfolded the second sketch. "This one has a name." "Barely. It's smudged, but look." At the bottom corner, nearly erased by dirt and time, were faint letters. Saint D. Jules leaned in, squinting behind their glasses. Saint D. They traced the edge of the torn paper. "There are a few saint institutions in this city. But this font style, this paper, this way it was drawn, it feels older. Like something from the 80s or early 90s? Keanu's brow furrowed. "Can you narrow it down?" Jules tapped their lip, thinking. "St. Dominic's Home for Children. It was out near the industrial zone on the east side. Shut down years ago. Big scandal. Abuse allegations, funding pulled. It was in the papers for a while, but like everything, it faded." Keanu's breath caught. "That sounds right. How do I find it?" Jules pulled out their old tablet and typed quickly. Within seconds, an old news clipping surfaced, faded and yellowed. "St. Dominic's closes doors amid controversy." Below the headline, a black and white photo of the building. The same outline, the same fence. Even the tree line was familiar. It matched the drawing exactly. "This is it," Keanu whispered. "This is where he was." Jules looked up sharply. "Keanu? If he was there and if someone took him from that place, you're dealing with something real." "I know. And dangerous?" Keanu's expression didn't change. "That's why I need to go. Now." Jules reached for his arm. "Wait. Don't go in blind. Let me come with you. I can't risk anyone else. Not yet." He took a photo of the old article and folded the sketches again, tucking them back into his jacket. Jules watched him gather his things. "Whatever this is, it's big." Keanu paused at the door. "It's a boy, alone, no name, and no one's looking for him but me. That makes it big enough." He left without waiting for a reply. Back on the road, Keanu traced the old route out toward the eastern fringe of the city, where factories turned into fenced lots and the clean streets gave way to potholes and graffiti-covered warehouses. His mind raced with every block, imagining what that building might look like now. If the boy was there, or had been, if there were others, if this really was the place where everything started, or where something even darker still waited. The road narrowed as he reached the old district. Street signs were rusted, some barely legible. A chain-link fence ran along the sidewalk, and behind it stood a massive, crumbling structure. He pulled over and stepped off the bike. The building stood like a ghost, its windows shattered, its frames scarred with time and neglect. Vines crept up the sides. Rust had eaten through the metal bars, and above the main entrance, barely hanging on, were the remaining letters of the sign. St. Dominic's Home for Children. His stomach turned. He was here, but he didn't know yet what he'd find inside. Keanu approached the entrance slowly, taking in every detail. The main gate was twisted, hanging awkwardly on one hinge. Graffiti covered the walls, but beneath the paint he could still make out pieces of murals once painted for children. Happy faces, rainbows, messages of hope. They were faded now, chipped and covered in grime, like echoes of promises that had never been kept. He took a few more steps forward. On the concrete just before the door, someone had spray-painted a crude version of the same symbol, the broken cross. It was fresh, bright red, jagged edges, not just graffiti. A warning. Keanu knelt and touched the ground, staring at the symbol. His fingers curled into his palm. He rose and walked along the perimeter of the fence, matching the drawing to what he saw. The boy had drawn this place from memory, not imagination, and he'd done it in fear. As he turned the corner, he saw a side gate half hidden behind a stack of trash bins. The chain lock was broken. Someone had been here recently, or never left. He stepped through and moved along a narrow path overtaken by weeds. Shards of broken glass crunched underfoot. In the dirt near the wall, something shiny caught his eye. He bent down. A broken pencil. He picked it up carefully. The same kind of stubby pencil the boy had used on the napkin. Worn, smooth from use. His chest ached. The boy had been here, maybe days ago, maybe still nearby. Keanu scanned the back of the building. A fire escape led up to a second-floor window, missing its glass. He climbed carefully, testing each step. The metal creaked, but held. Inside, the air was stale. Dust clung to every surface. The hallway was long, lined with doors that had been torn from their hinges. Water stains streaked the ceiling. Faint echoes of movement stirred through the corridors, but it was impossible to tell if they were real or just memories lodged in the walls. Keanu stepped softly, eyes sharp, senses heightened. He passed rooms filled with old bunk beds, some still made with stained sheets. Toy cars lay scattered across the floor of one hallway. Crayon drawings peeled from the walls in another. This place had been abandoned, yes, but not untouched. Then, faintly from deeper inside, he heard voices. Men's voices. Urgent. Angry. He froze. He moved quickly but quietly, pressing himself against the wall. He couldn't hear full sentences, but words floated through the air. Moving him tonight. Too much attention already. You should have dumped the sketches. Keanu's heart pounded. His worst fears were no longer fear. They were fact. He backed away slowly, knowing now that the boy's cry for help had exposed something much bigger, something still alive inside these walls. He turned back the way he came, vowing he'd return. With a plan. With help, if needed. But no matter what, he would not leave that boy behind. Keanu moved carefully through the broken frame of the old orphanage's side entrance. The rotted wood splintered beneath his boot as he stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Mildew, rust, and something else. Something older. The kind of scent that clings to places where too many people have suffered, and no one has ever come back to clean it up. St. Dominic's had once been a home for children, but there was no warmth in the air. No lingering laughter, only silence, the kind that pressed against the skin, the kind that warned you not to stay too long. He walked slowly down the main hallway. Cracks lined the walls like veins. Paint peeled in long curling strips. An old mural, once bright with rainbows and smiling faces, had nearly faded to gray, vandalized by graffiti and mold. The word hope had been scrawled over with something darker, crueler. Beneath his feet, broken glass and chipped tiles shifted noisily. It made him wince. Every sound felt too loud. He passed a common room. The furniture had been overturned, cushions slashed. Toys were scattered across the floor. Plastic dinosaurs, a deflated soccer ball, a doll missing its head, all left behind, forgotten. But it wasn't abandoned, not really. He could feel it. This place was still being used. The air was too fresh with disturbance. The dust had been unsettled. The floors showed faint prints. People had been here recently, maybe even now. He reached into his pocket and touched the boy's drawing again. The sketch of the building, the fence, and that unmistakable broken cross etched into the corner. His thumb lingered on the lines. The boy had drawn this from memory, from pain. Keanu turned a corner and stopped. A staircase led downward. The door at the top was ajar. The light bulb above it flickered dimly. He held his breath and listened. Faint voices. Men. Not yelling, but not calm either. There was tension in the way they spoke. Frustration. Urgency. He moved slowly toward the stairwell, every step calculated. As he got closer, the words became clearer. I told you, the shipment's late. Keep your voice down. I don't care. The boys already caused problems. The sketch. Then the voices dropped again, out of reach. Keanu's stomach tightened. He crouched behind the wall, heart pounding. They were talking about him, about the boy, about the sketch. This wasn't some abandoned building with squatters. This was an operation, a network. And the boy had seen something they didn't want him to see. Keanu inched closer, peeking down through the crack between the stair railings. Two men stood in a basement hallway, one of them wearing a black jacket with a faded red patch stitched on the sleeve, a broken cross. The same symbol from the boy's drawing, the same symbol tagged outside. Now he was sure. He was in the right place. Keanu backed away slowly, each step deliberate. He didn't make a sound. Every part of him wanted to charge forward, to grab the nearest object and confront them. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not like this. He was alone, and he didn't know how many more there might be inside. He had no weapon, no backup, no plan, just instincts, and the rising certainty that the boy was still here. He reached the end of the hallway again and stopped by a broken window. Cool air drifted through, brushing his face like a warning. He needed to get out, regroup, and think. As he turned to go, something caught the light just beyond the doorway, small, reflective, barely visible on the ground near a pile of debris. Keanu crouched and reached for it. A broken pencil, just the stub of one, worn down to the wood, the eraser missing, the metal band rusted. But he knew it instantly. The same kind the boy had used to sketch his portrait on the napkin. The same brand of stubby, soft lead pencils you found in shelters, donation bins, or scattered around cheap school desks. His hand closed around it. The boy had been here, and he had dropped this. Maybe recently, maybe just before Keanu arrived. The thought made his chest clench. He looked around again. The building felt like it was breathing. Every creak in the floor above him made him pause. Every echo of movement sent a wave of adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had to get out without being seen. He moved fast but low, retracing his steps to the fire escape. The hallway behind him remained silent. No one had followed. No alarms, just shadows and rotting wood. At the second-floor window, he paused once more, looking back at the dark hallway he'd just left. It looked ordinary, forgotten, but now he knew it wasn't. That basement wasn't storage. It was something else. He climbed back out and made his way down the fire escape. The steps groaned under his weight, but they held. He landed softly on the ground, checked his surroundings, and jogged toward the back fence. He found the hole he'd entered through and slipped out quickly, heart still racing. Once outside, the sky seemed to open up again. Even the gray light of day felt cleaner than the air inside that building. He leaned against the wall, breath sharp, mind racing. He'd found the place. He'd heard their voices. He had proof now, real proof. The broken cross, the voices, the mention of shipment, and that pencil. The boy had been inside, but confronting these men without a plan would end badly. They were organized, prepared, and they weren't just hiding, they were operating in plain sight, inside a place no one had cared about for years. It wasn't just a building, it was a front, and he had just stumbled straight into it. Keanu didn't hesitate once he hit the sidewalk. He pulled out his phone and called Jules. "I found it," he said, voice low but urgent. Found what? Jules answered immediately. You okay? St. Dominic's. The boys' drawings match everything. I went inside. There was a pause on the other end. You went inside? Alone? I had to. What did you see? Two men, talking about a shipment, talking about the boy. One of them had the broken cross patch. Jules swore under their breath. Keanu, that's not graffiti. That's a mark, like a brand. I've seen it in old reports. Underground groups that use symbols instead of names. That cross means something, and it's not good. Keanu nodded, pacing near his bike. I found a pencil, same kind the boy used. He's been there, he might still be. Then you can't go back alone. I won't. Not without knowing what I'm walking into. Jules paused again. I can try to find out more. I know someone who worked in child advocacy. He might have access to old facility records. Give me an hour. Keanu hung up and leaned against the side of a dumpster, the cold metal grounding him. His thoughts were sharper now, focused. This wasn't about vague suspicion anymore. This was happening, right here, right now. He thought about the boy again, how scared he must have been. Drawing those clues with trembling hands, hoping that someone, anyone, would find them before it was too late. Keanu had missed the first message. He wouldn't miss the second. He looked back at the building, barely visible beyond the crumbling fence and overgrown weeds. It sat like a forgotten scar in the middle of the city, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. And that made it the perfect place to hide something terrible. He pulled the sketches from his pocket one more time, spread them out across the seat of his bike, and stared at them again. The fence, the broken cross, the building's curve along the north wall. Everything matched. But now, a new detail stood out, something he hadn't noticed before. In the bottom corner of the second drawing, where the boy had drawn the tree line, there was a small mark. Not a tree, not a bush. It looked like a vent. Keanu's eyes narrowed. If there was an air vent along the back wall, maybe it could be an entry point. Maybe it was how the boy had escaped before, or watched them, or waited for someone to come. He carefully folded the drawings and placed them back in his jacket. He wasn't done, not by a long shot. He walked to his bike, started the engine, and pulled out onto the road again. He needed to think, he needed to plan, because when he went back to St. Dominic's, he wouldn't be going in alone. The next night, Keanu returned to St. Dominic's. He wore all black, his jacket zipped high and his boots quiet on the pavement. He left his motorcycle parked 2 blocks away in a dark alley. From here, he walked. He needed to approach in silence without attracting any attention. The streetlights near the old orphanage were dim, flickering with a half-dead glow. Everything about this side of the city seemed untouched by time or law. This time, he brought more than just sketches and instinct. In his pocket was a small flashlight. In his boot, a folding utility knife. Around his wrist, a bracelet with a pin needle tracker Jules had given him, just in case something went wrong. Keanu hoped it wouldn't come to that. As he reached the back fence, he crouched low and slipped through the gap he had used before. The weeds brushed his shoulders. The night air carried a damp chill. The place was too still. He paused beside the fire escape and looked up. No sounds, no voices this time. Just the groaning of old pipes and the whimper of wind slipping through broken windows. He climbed quickly, avoiding the worst of the rusted spots, and slid through the same second-story opening. Inside, the air was colder than the night outside. The smell was the same. Mold, rot, something worse buried deep in the walls. He moved quickly down the corridor, past the destroyed playroom, past the door with the words "Director's Office" scratched out by graffiti. He kept his back to the wall, pausing at every corner, listening. Nothing. He reached the top of the stairwell that led down to the basement and froze. Someone was there. A shadow moved at the bottom of the stairs. A large figure in a black jacket. The sleeve bore the red broken cross. Keanu drew back quickly, too late. The man looked up. "Hey." Keanu didn't wait. He turned and ran back down the hallway, dodging broken furniture and piles of debris. Footsteps thundered behind him. He knew he couldn't make it back to the fire escape in time. Instead, he veered right, toward the back of the building, praying that his memory had served him correctly. He reached a side door, jammed. He slammed his shoulder into it once, twice. The third time it cracked open. He slipped through into the back corridor and slammed it shut behind him. No lock, but enough of a delay. He ran to the end of the hallway, turned another corner, and stopped. There, against the far wall, was a storage door, a metal handle, a rusted lock. But the lock was loose. Inside, he heard breathing. Shallow, frightened. He stepped closer. "Hello?" he whispered. "It's okay. I'm here to help." No answer. He slowly opened the door, and there he was. The boy sat curled on the floor, surrounded by torn paper and old blankets. A dim beam of moonlight filtered through a cracked vent above, casting a silver line across his face. His arms were wrapped tightly around a sketch pad. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. Keanu froze, taking in every detail. The boy didn't move, didn't speak, just stared, unsure whether to run, cry, or hide deeper into the dark. Keanu knelt down slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Hey," he said softly. "Do you remember me?" Still nothing. "I'm the guy you drew outside the cafe." The boy blinked once, his grip tightening on the sketch pad. "I didn't know," Keanu continued gently. "I didn't see the message on the back. I should have." He removed the folded napkin from his jacket and laid it gently on the ground between them. "You asked for help. I'm here now." The boy looked at the napkin but didn't reach for it. "I know you're scared," Keanu said, his voice quieter now. "I was scared too when I was your age. I used to sleep in the back of a bus station some nights. Other times it was shelters or strangers' couches. I didn't think anyone saw me." He let that settle for a moment. "But someone did," Keanu added. "One person saw me. Gave me a second chance." The boy shifted slightly. "I don't have all the answers," Keanu said. "But I know this, whatever they did to you, whatever they're still doing, you don't deserve it. And you don't have to stay here." He held out his hand, palm up. The boy stared at it. Minutes passed. The footsteps in the distance reminded them both they didn't have much time. Still, Keanu didn't rush. He let the silence sit between them like a fragile bridge. "I'll protect you," he said. "I promise, no matter what." The boy's lower lip trembled. He slowly uncurled one arm from around his sketch pad and reached out. His fingers, small and shaking, touched Keanu's. Keanu closed his hand gently around them. "That's it," he whispered. "You're not alone anymore." He pulled the boy into a hug, careful of his thin frame. The boy didn't resist. His whole body shook, but he clung tightly to his sketch pad, even as he leaned into Keanu's chest. "Let's go," Keanu said. He scooped the boy into his arms. The sketch pad pressed between them. The boy buried his face in Keanu's shoulder. Keanu stepped into the hall again, listening carefully. No footsteps now, but they were still there, watching, waiting. He moved quickly, retracing his steps toward the side exit. He slipped down the corridor, boots making as little noise as possible. The boy in his arms was so light, too light. Keanu felt every bone, every tremble. He held him tighter. They reached the end of the hallway and rounded the corner. The door he'd broken earlier was still ajar. He pushed it open with his shoulder and stepped out into the open air. The night wrapped around them like a shroud. No voices yet, no alarms. But Keanu didn't trust the silence. He ran across the overgrown yard, the weeds brushing against his legs. The broken fence loomed ahead. The hole he had entered through now seemed impossibly narrow. But he ducked, twisted, and made it through with the boy cradled tightly against him. Beyond the fence, the road was empty. No headlights, no shouts. He ran 2 blocks to where he had hidden the car. An old, dark pool sedan loaned from a friend. Not flashy, not traceable. Parked under a dead street lamp beside an abandoned warehouse. He unlocked the door and slid the boy into the back seat, covering him with a jacket. "Stay low," he said gently. The boy nodded but said nothing. Keanu got behind the wheel. Before he turned the key, he glanced in the rearview mirror. 2 figures had stepped into the street behind them, just at the edge of the shadows. One of them raised a phone. The other started walking faster. Keanu started the car. The engine roared to life, louder than he liked. He hit the gas. The tires screeched as the sedan peeled away from the curb. In the mirror, the men broke into a run. Keanu turned sharply at the next corner, then again, weaving through side streets. He didn't slow down. Every light he passed felt like a spotlight. Every car he saw in the distance felt like it could be following. Only when they'd crossed into another district, miles from St. Dominic's, did he ease off the gas. The boy hadn't said a word the entire time, but he hadn't let go of the sketch pad either. Keanu looked at him through the mirror again. "You okay?" A nod. Then, finally, the boy spoke. "You saw it," he whispered. "The place, the people." "I did. Specially designed to stop. Even when you run..." Keanu's voice was firm. "I won't let them hurt you again." The boy looked down, his fingers pressing into the sketch pad like it was the only anchor he had left. Keanu turned the wheel toward a location he knew would be safe, for now. But he also knew what the boy had said was true. This wasn't over. The men back at St. Dominic's wouldn't let this go. The broken cross wasn't just a symbol. It was a target. And now that Keanu had stepped into their world, they wouldn't stop watching, wouldn't stop hunting. But he didn't care. He had the boy now, and he would do whatever it took to keep him safe. The night air bit against Keanu's skin as he bolted from the crumbling doorway, with the boy still clutched tightly in his arms. The boy held on, face buried against Keanu's shoulder, trying to make himself smaller. Every step Keanu took sent pain lancing through his legs, but he didn't slow down. Not even for a second. Not with the echo of heavy boots growing louder behind them. The courtyard outside St. Dominic's was half-eaten by weeds, strewn with trash, and wide open. Nowhere to hide, no cover, just a direct sprint toward the back fence. Keanu pushed forward, breath ragged, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The broken section of fence he had entered through hours earlier now felt a mile away. His boots slipped in the dirt, caught in a root, but he kept moving. Behind him, a voice shouted, "Stop!" Another yelled, "They've got the kid!" Keanu didn't look back. The boy's trembling hand clutched the front of Keanu's jacket with everything he had left. Keanu could feel the thrum of his fear. Every breath, every tremor. The sketch pad was still in the boy's grip, tucked tightly against his chest. They reached the fence. Keanu ducked low and slid through the same breach he had used to enter. This time, it wasn't graceful. The bottom of his coat snagged on a sharp wire, tearing the seam. He pulled through anyway, scraping his knuckles, shielding the boy as best he could. Once they were through, he didn't pause. He kept running down the sidewalk, weaving between rusted light poles and forgotten dumpsters. Ahead, parked beneath a busted street lamp, was the sedan. The dull blue vehicle sat like a promise in the dark. Keanu opened the back door and lowered the boy inside. "Stay down," he whispered. "Cover yourself." The boy didn't speak. He just obeyed, curling beneath the jacket Keanu had tossed in earlier. Keanu slammed the door shut, ran around to the driver's side, and jumped in. He started the engine. That's when he saw them. 2 men emerged from the alley beside St. Dominic's, sprinting full force toward the street. Their coats flared behind them, one of them already reaching into his waistband for something. Keanu shifted into gear. The tires spun against the cracked pavement, then caught with a shriek. The sedan shot forward. The boy gasped from the back seat, holding on as the car rocketed down the narrow road. Keanu's eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The two men were still running. One yelled into a phone, the other kicked at a trash bin in frustration. But they weren't giving up. The car roared to life in the distance behind them. They were being followed. Keanu turned sharply, cutting across a side street lined with shuttered shops and busted neon signs. The sedan swerved, tires catching loose gravel. He didn't slow down. The city blurred around them, metal, glass, and streetlights streaking through the windows. The boy didn't speak, but he didn't cry either. He held on. Keanu took another turn, then another, weaving through an unfamiliar part of the industrial district. Warehouses loomed on either side of them like silent sentinels. The GPS on the dash flickered, unable to orient them. That was fine. Keanu wasn't using it. He was driving from instinct, from fear, and from something deeper than both, an iron will to protect what no one else had noticed. The boy had become quiet again, but his eyes stayed open now, peering up from beneath the jacket. Keanu glanced back briefly. "You okay?" The boy nodded. Keanu looked forward again. He turned off the headlights. It was risky, but necessary. He coasted through a side road that led behind an old storage facility, then rolled the car into a narrow alley between two corrugated metal buildings. He shut the engine off and waited. The only sound was their breathing, the boys still shallow. Keanu slower now, but tight. In the distance, another car passed, then another. Neither turned into the alley. After 5 minutes, the street fell quiet again. Keanu finally exhaled. They weren't being chased anymore. Not for now. The boy sat up slightly, his knees drawn to his chest. His eyes met Keanu's in the rearview mirror. No questions, no words, just tired gratitude. Keanu leaned back in the seat and let the silence hold them both for a moment. The weight of what had just happened settled like a stone in his chest. It hadn't just been a rescue. It had been an escape from something far bigger than he could fully understand. The broken cross wasn't just a patch. It was part of something organized, trained, resourceful. These weren't amateurs. These were people who had worked in the dark for years, confident no one would ever come looking. But they hadn't counted on this boy, and they hadn't counted on Keanu. He started the engine again and pulled out of the alley slowly. This time he drove with purpose, cautious but steady. He knew where to go next. A friend, off the books, ran a small underground medical clinic a few neighborhoods away. Not a hospital, no records, no questions. It was built for people like this. Those who couldn't risk the system, but still needed to survive. As he drove, the boy shifted forward. "They said I'd never leave," he whispered. Keanu looked at him through the mirror. They were wrong. The boy gripped the sketchpad tighter. "They're not just at St. Dominic's," the boy added, voice low. "There are others. Other places." Keanu nodded. He had suspected it. Now he knew. This wasn't just about one child. It never had been. But first, he had to keep this boy alive. He turned down a side street, then another, until the glow of the city faded behind them. The buildings thinned, fewer windows, less noise. The clinic was just ahead, tucked behind a pawn shop with boarded-up windows. Keanu pulled in without headlights, shut off the car, and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're safe now," he said. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The old clinic stood behind a shuttered pawn shop, hidden from the street by tall hedges and a rusted chain-link gate. Most people would pass it without a second glance. There was no sign, no indication it was even operational, but Keanu knew it was still there. It had always been one of the city's last safe places. Quiet, off the books, and trusted by those who had nowhere else to go. He pulled the car into the narrow driveway and turned off the engine. The boy, curled in the back seat beneath the jacket, hadn't spoken again since whispering his last warning. His eyes were open but dim. He looked exhausted, his face pale under the moonlight, his grip still locked around the worn sketch pad. Keanu stepped out of the car and knocked twice on the metal back door. A moment passed. Then a small hatch slid open, revealing a pair of cautious eyes behind thick lenses. "Keanu," the voice said, low but familiar. "I need help," Keanu replied. "Urgent." The hatch shut. A heavy bolt slid open. The door creaked, and a man in his 60s appeared. Lean, weathered, dressed in scrubs and a hoodie. His name was Dr. Lionel Reese, a retired trauma surgeon who had spent the last 2 decades helping the city's invisible. "Inside?" Reese said, stepping aside. Keanu returned to the car, gently lifted the boy in his arms, and carried him through the narrow hallway of the clinic. The boy didn't resist, but his skin was clammy, and his limbs hung limp with fatigue. Keanu followed Reese to a small examination room tucked in the back. It smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. The table was clean, the lights dimmed. Reese examined the boy quickly but thoroughly. "Malnourished," he murmured. "Dehydrated. Bruised ribs, minor lacerations on the arms. Nothing broken, thank God." He attached a saline IV, cleaned the boy's wounds, and took a blood pressure reading. The boy barely flinched. "Keep him warm," Reese said, covering him with a blanket. "And don't let him sleep too deeply yet. He needs fluids, and I want to monitor his breathing. We've seen kids come in shock before. I've lost a few, not again." Keanu sat beside the boy and rested a hand lightly on the blanket. He could feel the shallow rise and fall of the boy's chest. "Wouldn't tell me his name," Keanu said quietly. "Doesn't matter," Reese replied. "You don't need names to save someone." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Keanu looked at him. "I can't go to the police yet." Reese didn't argue. "Good. You shouldn't. This thing smells too rotten. If it's what I think it is, someone in the system's already on their payroll. Best you stay quiet." Keanu nodded. "He told me there are others." Reese's jaw clenched. "Then we need to find them. But first, you need to keep him alive." Keanu looked at the boy, whose eyes were now fluttering, trying to stay open. Alive. That was step 1. The boy stirred an hour later, blinking slowly under the dim light. Keanu leaned forward, speaking softly. "You're okay. You're safe now." The boy's voice came out hoarse, barely audible. "Where am I?" "A friend's place," Keanu replied. "A clinic. Nobody knows you're here. Nobody can find you." The boy's body trembled under the blanket. His lips were dry, but his voice was steadier now. They were going to sell me." Keanu sat back, the words cutting through him like a blade. He didn't speak. He couldn't, not at first. The boy stared at the ceiling. "They told me I was too much trouble. That if I didn't draw what they told me, I'd disappear like the others. They keep the new kids in the basement, under the hallway, where no one hears them." "Other kids?" Keanu asked, his voice tight. The boy nodded, slowly. "3, I think, maybe more. I don't know their names. We weren't allowed to talk." Keanu's jaw clenched. He looked toward Reese, who had paused in the doorway, listening. "They move them at night," the boy continued. "Vans, no lights. They say they're sending us to better homes, but no one ever comes back." Keanu felt his fists balling. He forced himself to breathe. "Davey told me not to speak," the boy said. "Told me nobody would care, that people like me disappear all the time." Keanu looked into his eyes. They were wrong. The boy blinked, a tear sliding silently across his cheek. He gripped the sketch pad again. "I tried to leave a map, in case someone ever found it." "You did," Keanu said. "You left more than a map. You left a truth. I just wish I'd seen it sooner." Reese stepped forward with a cup of water and helped the boy sit up enough to drink. He took small sips, his hands still shaking. Keanu watched him, guilt sinking deep into his chest. "He drew that portrait of me," he said quietly to Reese. "Right there, on the street. I smiled, took it, and left. I didn't even turn it over until days later, and by then, Reese placed a hand on his shoulder. You turned around. That's what matters. Keanu nodded slowly, eyes locked on the boy. He's won, but there are more, and we'll get them, Reese said. But carefully, this isn't a fight you win in a day. Keanu stood and walked to the far end of the room, staring out the narrow window into the night. The city was still out there, alive, blind, and moving, but now he had seen behind the curtain. He couldn't unsee it. He turned back. The boy had drifted into a light sleep again, still holding the sketchpad like it was a shield. Keanu knew the days ahead would be harder. The system wasn't built to protect kids like this, not anymore. But he was. And he wasn't walking away. Keanu stepped outside the clinic into the stillness of early dawn. The alley behind the shuttered pawn shop was empty, except for a soft breeze stirring dust along the concrete. He took out his phone, his hands steady but cold. He knew who he had to call. Someone who had helped him in a very different kind of crisis years ago. Her name was Andrea Shelton, a high-powered attorney who had once walked away from a lucrative firm to focus on child welfare cases. She didn't take publicity. She didn't want cameras. But when children were in danger and the law needed teeth, she answered. Keanu typed a quick message. Urgent. Child in danger. Need your help. Trust no one. I'll explain in person. Seconds later, his phone vibrated. Send location. I'm on my way. Next, he opened a secure contact list and tapped on an entry labeled Harbor Light. It rang twice. A voice answered, Calm, female, go. This is Keanu Reeves. I need a rapid response team. Quiet, no leaks. Child trafficking ring. Possible ongoing movement. At least 3 victims still unaccounted for. I have a survivor. There was a pause. Then, understood. Safe location? He gave the address. The voice confirmed a field coordinator would be dispatched immediately. No names, no questions, just help. Back inside, the boy was still asleep, curled up in the same position, arms around the sketchpad like it was part of him. Keanu sat beside the bed and studied the worn paper. It was covered in fresh pencil lines, places and faces drawn with remarkable detail. But it wasn't just talent that showed, it was longing. Every figure had a face full of kindness. Every building had open doors, sunlit windows. The boy was dreaming on paper. He stirred slightly and opened his eyes. Keanu gave a soft smile. You slept a little. The boy nodded. His voice was hoarse. I feel not scared. Here. Keanu nodded. Good. You're not alone anymore. They sat in quiet for a few minutes. Then the boy spoke again. Is it okay if I draw? Keanu reached for a fresh piece of paper on the table and placed it in front of him, along with a pencil Reese had left behind. It's more than okay, Keanu said. It's you. The boy's small hand gripped the pencil tightly, and he began sketching with slow, careful strokes. As he worked, Keanu asked gently, Why do you like to draw so much? The boy didn't look up. It makes the noise go quiet. What kind of noise? The kind that tells you no one's coming. Keanu swallowed hard. Well, I came, and I'm staying. The boy stopped drawing for a second. Why? Because I believe you, Keanu said. And I think what you're doing, this art, it's important. The boy's voice was just above a whisper. I want to be an artist someday. A real one. Like someone who tells stories that make other kids not feel so gone. Keanu smiled softly. Then that's what we're going to protect. Not just you, your future. The boy gave a tiny nod and then went back to drawing, pencil moving like it had a purpose again. Andrea Shelton arrived within the hour. She wore a black blazer over jeans, and her presence was as calm as it was commanding. She didn't waste time with greetings. Show me everything, she said. Keanu handed over the napkin sketch, the torn drawing from behind a dumpster, and the details the boy had shared. Andrea studied each piece in silence, her eyes sharp, her mouth tight. "I'll need statements, but we'll keep them sealed. No courts unless absolutely necessary. My team will work through emergency protocols and coordinate with Harbor Light." She glanced toward the exam room door. "He's too young to testify formally, but if he's willing to talk to our child advocate, we can start filing for immediate protective status." Keanu nodded. "Whatever it takes." Andrea paused. "You're not just a witness in this. You're a protector now. And if what you're describing turns out to be part of an organized trafficking network, this gets bigger than just rescue. You're stepping into a legal war." "I know," Keanu said. She raised an eyebrow. "Good, because it's going to get messy." That afternoon, a small team from Harbor Light arrived at the clinic. 2 social workers, 1 trauma counselor, and a field investigator. They moved like ghosts, checking the perimeter, verifying ID, and reviewing documents without drawing attention. They took DNA swabs, documented the boy's injuries, and recorded Keanu's account off camera, verifying every step he'd taken. Through it all, the boy kept drawing. He didn't speak much to the others, but when Keanu sat down beside him and asked what he was working on, he smiled faintly and turned the paper. It was a scene of the clinic, drawn in perfect perspective. But it wasn't the real version. It was what the boy imagined it could be. Bright, full of life. A place where people came to be safe and whole. "Do you believe it can look like this?" the boy asked. Keanu looked at the drawing, then at him. "Yes, and I think you'll be the one to show people how." The boy looked down. "They called me useless, said art doesn't matter, said I'd be trash." Keanu shook his head. "They lied, they always lie, but the truth? You're proving it every time you put pencil to paper." The boy looked back at him. "Then I'll keep drawing." Andrea returned that evening with news. "We have a path forward. A protection order can be filed tonight, but he'll need to stay in a secured location for now. My team found a vetted family. Not permanent, but safe." Keanu looked at the boy. "You okay with that?" The boy hesitated. "Will I still see you?" Keanu smiled. "I'll be there as long as you need me." The boy reached out slowly. His hand landed in Keanu's, small and warm. That night, as they prepared to move him, the boy handed Keanu a new sketch. It was a picture of them, side by side on a hilltop, looking out over a bright city. At the bottom, he had written 5 words. "Thank you for not leaving." Keanu folded it carefully, heart aching, because he knew the fight wasn't over. But the reason for fighting had never been clearer. The first sign something was wrong came 2 days after the boy had been moved to the safe house. Keanu had just finished a quiet call with Andrea Shelton when his phone buzzed again. Unknown number, no name. He stared at the screen for a second, debating whether to answer. Then, cautiously, he picked up. There was a pause. Then a voice, flat and deliberate, came through the line. "Back off. He doesn't belong to you." Click. Keanu stood, frozen for a moment. Then he moved quickly. He called Andrea back, relayed the message, and immediately requested a sweep of the boy's temporary residence. The safe house had been hand-picked and vetted by the NGO, discreet, protected, and anonymous, but this call meant someone had gotten too close. An hour later, one of the Harbor Light operatives confirmed it. There were 2 men seen loitering across the street, the report read. No interaction, but they were watching. When approached, they disappeared. Keanu's gut twisted. These weren't random threats. Whoever they were organized, cautious, and sending a message. He drove straight to the safe house. It was located on a quiet cul-de-sac just outside downtown. He pulled up slowly, eyes sweeping the area. No parked cars out of place, no figures in the windows. Still, his senses were on high alert. Inside, the boy was seated at a small kitchen table, sketching silently. Keanu knelt beside him. How are you feeling?" The boy looked up. There were faint shadows under his eyes. "I had a dream last night. The room went dark and I couldn't draw. The pencil just broke." Keanu nodded, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're safe here, I promise. And if anything changes, I'll be there in seconds." The boy returned to his sketching, but Keanu noticed something different. The drawing wasn't like the ones before. It was of a house surrounded by trees, but the shadows were jagged. The windows were dark. And in the far corner, a small figure crouched behind a wall, clutching a notebook. Keanu's heart sank. The boy's fear was returning and growing. Later that night, Andrea met Keanu in person at her office, which now doubled as a temporary operations base. "We filed the emergency protection status paperwork 2 days ago," she said, tossing a folder onto the desk. "But the agency is dragging its feet. They want formal deposition statements from both you and the boy, and psychological clearance from 2 state-approved doctors." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "That could take weeks." "I know," she said, "but that's the price of trying to do it legally." Keanu sighed. "I'm not waiting for a rubber stamp while they close in. I'll give my statement tonight. Whatever it takes." Andrea leaned back in her chair. "Are you sure? This puts your name on the line. If this becomes public, they'll try to spin you as a vigilante, or worse." "I don't care about that," Keanu said. "I care about him." Andrea nodded slowly. "Then let's do it." She set up a recorder and began the deposition. Keanu gave a detailed account from the moment he met the boy on the street to the discovery at St. Dominic's. He described the sounds he'd overheard, the symbols, the threats, and the broken pencil he found near the building. Every detail was precise, and every word carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and refused to forget it. The next morning, Keanu returned to the safe house. A security team now patrolled the area quietly. 2 vehicles were rotated every 6 hours, and no one approached without clearance. Inside, the boy was again seated with his sketch pad, but this time the drawing was unmistakably darker. It showed 2 tall men standing outside a house. Their eyes were black circles, no faces, just blank silhouettes staring through windows. Keanu crouched beside him. "You saw someone?" The boy didn't answer. He just nodded. Keanu exhaled slowly. "We're working on it. We've already told the right people, but we may have to move again." The boy looked up. "Do they know where I am?" "We don't think so," Keanu said. "But I'm not taking any chances." The boy went back to drawing, but his hand trembled slightly. Keanu sat across from him, unsure of how to ease the fear. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the sketch the boy had given him days ago, the one of them standing on a hill. He placed it on the table. "This is still possible," Keanu said. "That place in your drawing, it's not gone. It's waiting. We just have to keep going." The boy didn't speak, but he nodded again. Meanwhile, Andrea pushed harder on the legal front. She filed a complaint with the State Child Welfare Office, requesting emergency review due to imminent credible threats. She also contacted 2 licensed trauma psychologists who could conduct evaluations discreetly within 24 hours. Still, the system moved slowly. Keanu checked in with Harbor Light, asking about the other children the boy had mentioned. The NGO was working leads, but there were no breakthroughs yet. The original St. Dominic's property had gone cold. The men who had loitered outside vanished, and the broken cross symbol had shown up twice more, once near an abandoned school and once spray-painted on a dumpster behind a church. All signs pointed to something broader, something that extended far beyond one crumbling orphanage. That night, as Keanu lay awake in a guest room of the safe house, his phone buzzed again. No caller ID, just a voicemail. He listened. Same voice as before. Calm, almost mocking. You should have left him. This doesn't end with one kid. Then silence. Keanu didn't sleep after that. Instead, he walked to the boy's room and quietly checked in. The child was curled under a blanket, sketch pad beside him, thumb tucked beneath his chin. Even in sleep, he looked uncertain, fragile, and small. Keanu sat by the doorway, watching the window as the first hints of morning crept in. The fear hadn't left. It was closing in. But so was something else. Resolve. He wasn't giving up. Not now, not ever. The call came just after midnight. Keanu had been dozing in a chair near the boy's room, his jacket pulled around him and one eye still half open. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old floorboards. When the phone vibrated, he snatched it up instantly. It was Dr. Rami, the trauma physician who had first examined the boy. His voice was firm. "We have intel. They know where he is. You need to move, now." Keanu didn't hesitate. "Understood." The doctor's voice softened slightly. "There's a second safe house. New location, off-grid, one of Harbor Light's highest-level placements. I've already called the coordinator. They'll be ready." Keanu stood up, his muscles stiff but his mind sharp. Within minutes, he was inside the boy's room. The child was asleep, curled into a ball beneath a thick gray blanket. Keanu knelt down, gently placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Hey," he said softly. "We need to go." The boy stirred, eyes fluttering open, dazed and confused. "What's wrong?" "Nothing bad's happened," Keanu said. "But it might, and I'm not taking chances. We're moving you somewhere safer." The boy sat up slowly. "Now?" "Now," Keanu said, already pulling a fresh hoodie over the child's small frame and wrapping the blanket around him like a shawl. They moved quickly and quietly. Keanu had packed a small go-bag days earlier just in case. Water, extra clothes, protein bars, a flashlight, and the boy's drawings. He added the sketch pad from the kitchen table and the original napkin drawing, folding it gently into a padded envelope. Outside, the night was cold and empty. The usual Harbor Light team had already cleared the perimeter. One of the operatives nodded silently and handed Keanu a new set of car keys. "No tracking, no plates, just drive and don't stop. Address is pre-programmed in the GPS. Don't call anyone until you get there." Keanu placed the boy in the back seat and pulled away from the curb with the headlights off until they turned the first corner. The city lights faded behind them as they drove north, the freeway quiet at this hour. Keanu kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the center console, listening to the faint breathing of the child beside him. At one point, the boy spoke. "Are they following us?" "No," Keanu said. "Not tonight." Silence followed, but it was no longer empty. It felt like resistance, like survival. An hour later, they turned off onto a narrow road leading into a wooded residential area. The houses here were spaced far apart, with large yards and thick tree cover. Finally, they arrived at a small cottage tucked behind an overgrown hedge, barely visible from the street. Two Harbor Light workers greeted them with quiet professionalism. Inside, the space was warm and clean. There was no television, no obvious tech, just simple furniture, handmade quilts, and quiet lamps casting soft yellow light. The boy walked slowly through the space, scanning every corner. Then he looked at Keanu. "Can I sleep here?" Keanu knelt down. "As long as you need." The boy nodded. "Okay." Keanu watched as he stepped into the small bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, his blanket still wrapped around him. Then the boy looked back. "You'll still be here in the morning?" "I will," Keanu said. "I'm not going anywhere." The boy fell asleep quickly, curled up beside his sketch pad like before. But this time, there was something different in the way his face settled. Not peace, but something closer to trust. Something hard-earned. Keanu sat in the living room with a thermos of black coffee and the sketch the boy had given him still folded in his jacket. He unfolded it slowly and stared. A hilltop, two figures standing side by side. Light in the sky. That image had started it all. A drawing from a boy with no name, no safety, and almost no chance. And yet here they were. But Keanu knew the story wasn't finished. The threats hadn't disappeared just because they were quiet tonight. The people behind St. Dominic's were still out there, and from the way they'd tracked the boy before, they had resources, connections, methods that operated far beyond the public eye. He sipped the coffee and pulled out his notebook, jotting down thoughts. Loose ends, clues, the broken cross, the shipment he'd overheard, the anonymous voicemails, the symbols found at 2 other abandoned sites. There was a pattern, a network, maybe even a ring. And if that was true, then rescuing this boy was just the first move. Others were still trapped. Kids who hadn't made it to the street, who couldn't draw a cry for help on a napkin. He'd already made contact with a former FBI analyst, someone who had assisted on missing persons cases involving at-risk children. They agreed to meet in 2 days. Andrea was assembling a formal case package that could trigger federal intervention if the state system stalled further. But it still wasn't enough. This wasn't just about law enforcement. It was about waking people up. For every child that slipped through the cracks, there were a dozen adults who had chosen to look away. Keanu looked down at the boy's drawing again. A map, a message, a moment that had stopped him in his tracks. What if no one else had seen that sketch? What if no one else had cared? He clenched his jaw, the weight of that truth sinking in. He wasn't just protecting this boy. He was making a statement, loud and clear. These children weren't invisible. Not anymore. At dawn, he stood outside the cottage, watching fog drift through the pines. His coat was zipped, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the road. Not with fear, but with readiness. Whatever came next, he was ready for it, because one child had drawn hope into the world, and Keanu had decided that hope would not be erased. The days became a blur of paperwork, calls, and court filings. Keanu met with Andrea almost every morning now, his voice steady but worn from the emotional weight of the process. Lawyers representing the NGO worked tirelessly behind the scenes, building a case strong enough to survive scrutiny from skeptical agencies and resistant judges. Each form had to be exact. Each psychological report notarized. The boy's story had to be delivered delicately, true but not so graphic it would be buried in bureaucracy. 3 separate judges reviewed the early filings. One denied the emergency status. One delayed it. The third, a sharp-eyed woman named Judge Porter, took an interest. After a private conversation with Andrea and a review of Keanu's signed deposition, she ordered a full hearing within 2 weeks. Keanu testified again. This time, it wasn't in a dim office or a discreet NGO building. It was in a courtroom. Plain, cold, and sterile. He wore no suit, just a black shirt and jeans. He sat down, looked the judge in the eyes, and told the story. How he met the boy, how he found the hidden message, what he saw inside the crumbling orphanage, and what he feared was still out there. I've played a lot of roles in my life, Keanu said quietly, but this isn't a movie. This is a kid who didn't ask for any of this, and the fact that he survived what he did should be enough to tell us he deserves a chance. Judge Porter listened without interrupting. Then came the expert witnesses. The trauma doctor testified. So did the psychologist who had met with the boy 3 times since the move to the second safe house. Both confirmed the signs of long-term fear, hypervigilance, and the boy's refusal to speak his name due to fear of being found. The courtroom was silent. The opposing counsel, a government-appointed legal representative, asked minimal questions. Even they seemed uncomfortable arguing against the motion. After final statements, Judge Porter called for recess. Keanu stepped outside with Andrea and the boy, who sat beside him on the courthouse bench, head low and arms wrapped around his sketchpad. "You did good today," Keanu whispered. The boy nodded but said nothing. He just continued drawing in silence. 1 hour later, the judge returned and issued her decision. Based on the submitted evidence, testimony, and clinical evaluations, she said, this court grants emergency asylum and protected placement for the minor identified as John Doe. Placement is to be made with the designated foster guardian vetted by Harbor Light and approved by Child Protective Services. Andrea squeezed Keanu's arm. It was done. The next day, Keanu helped the boy pack. It didn't take long. The boy didn't own much, just a single backpack, a worn hoodie, and a stack of sketch pads tied together with string. His pencils, carefully rolled into a cloth wrap, went into a side pocket. Keanu drove him to the foster home himself. It was a small, cozy house on a quiet street near a park. A woman in her early 50s greeted them on the porch with a soft smile. She knelt to the boy's level, said nothing, and simply held out her hand. The boy looked up at Keanu. Keanu nodded once. It's okay. She's here to protect you, too. The boy reached out slowly and took the woman's hand. She guided him gently through the front door, allowing him to look around at his own pace. The living room had warm colors, a bookcase filled with children's books, and a small table with coloring supplies already laid out. Keanu stood at the doorway, his hands in his pockets, unsure whether to step inside or not. But before he could turn away, the boy ran back to him. He wrapped his arms around Keanu's waist, holding tightly. Keanu froze, surprised by the sudden contact. Then he slowly lowered himself to one knee and returned the embrace. The boy whispered into his ear, "Thank you for seeing me." Keanu's throat tightened. He placed a hand on the boy's back. "You were never invisible," he whispered back. "Not to me." They stayed like that for a moment, unmoving. Then the boy stepped back, wiped his eyes with his sleeve, and walked inside. The door didn't close all the way. It stayed slightly ajar, like an invitation to return any time. Keanu stepped off the porch and exhaled. Outside, the sky was a quiet gray. Leaves drifted across the sidewalk. For the first time in weeks, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt open. Possibility. Healing. Renewal. Andrea called as he got back into his car. "It's official," she said. "The paperwork's being expedited. He'll be off the radar completely. New identity, new school, full protection." Keanu nodded, though she couldn't see it. "He deserves that. He's got a clean slate now, and a future." Keanu looked toward the window of the house. The boy had already disappeared from view, probably exploring his room, maybe even sketching already. "That sketch on the napkin," Keanu said, "wasn't just a drawing." Andrea was silent on the other end. It was a flare, a signal, something that said, "I'm still here," and the world almost missed it. "But you didn't," Andrea said. "No," Keanu said softly. "I didn't." That night, back at his home, Keanu placed the original napkin sketch into a protective frame and hung it near his writing desk. It wasn't for display. No one would know its story unless he told them. But for him, it was a reminder, a moment that could have passed, a child who could have vanished, and a choice, one quiet moment of attention that changed everything. He stared at it for a long time before turning off the light. The system had tried to erase this child, to file him away, to lose him like so many others. But not on his watch. Not ever. The morning was bright and unseasonably warm for late spring. As Keanu stepped out of his car and onto the quiet street, he could already hear laughter echoing from the backyard. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and balloons fluttered above the fence line, tied to the wooden posts with curling ribbons. It had been months since the courtroom ruling, months since Keanu had last held the boy's hand outside that foster home and said goodbye. But not a week had passed without updates, quiet visits, or exchanged sketches. The boy, still cautious with names, had blossomed into something entirely new. Keanu followed the sound of music through the open side gate. As he stepped into the yard, a burst of life greeted him. Kids played tag beneath a makeshift streamer arch. There was a folding table covered in snacks and cupcakes, along with paper plates decorated with cartoon drawings of suns, stars, and laughing animals. At the center of it all stood the boy. He wore a bright blue t-shirt, smudged with a bit of frosting on the sleeve, and held a water balloon in one hand. When he saw Keanu, he froze for a second. Then a wide grin spread across his face. Keanu smiled and opened his arms. The boy ran forward and hugged him tightly. "You made it," he said, his voice brighter, steadier than Keanu had ever heard it. "Of course I did," Keanu replied. "I wouldn't miss it." The foster mother waved from the porch, offering him a soda and a slice of cake. Keanu politely declined the cake but accepted the drink, grateful for the moment to simply observe. He watched as the boy played and laughed, chased and was chased, entirely alive in a world he'd once almost vanished from. No longer hiding behind doorways, no longer clutching sketch pads like shields. He had begun to live again. When the party quieted down and the sun started casting long shadows across the yard, the boy came to Keanu and pulled something from behind his back. "I made you something," he said shyly, "for helping me, for everything." Keanu took the wrapped bundle in his hands. It was light, square, and clearly hand-packaged in brown paper. He peeled it open carefully, and when he saw what was inside, he stopped breathing for a second. It was a painting, a watercolor scene, simple, vibrant, powerful. Two figures stood on a small green hill, one tall, one small. A soft blue sky stretched above them, dotted with clouds. Between them was a single beam of sunlight breaking through. Keanu's throat tightened. "It's us," the boy said softly. "The day you found me." Keanu turned the painting over. On the back, in uneven handwriting, were 5 words that hit harder than anything else he had heard that day. "You gave me a new life." He closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of it rushing in. He had come that day thinking he was just showing support, just visiting a kid he'd helped once. But now he realized this day wasn't about the past. It was about something deeper. About redemption. About healing, for both of them. He gently placed the painting back into its wrapping and held it close to his chest. "Thank you," Keanu said quietly. The boy grinned again. "Do you think I'll be an artist someday?" "You already are," Keanu replied, "and a great one." As the sun dipped lower, the party began to wind down. Parents arrived to pick up their children. The music softened. Paper plates were stacked, and leftover balloons tied into bunches for the kids to take home. Keanu stayed behind, helping fold chairs and gather empty bottles. When the yard finally cleared, he sat on the porch steps with the boy beside him. There was a moment of silence between them, comfortable, full of meaning. "You know," Keanu began, "when I first saw you across from that cafe, something told me to cross the street. I didn't know why, but I felt it." The boy nodded. "I almost didn't give you the drawing." Rewind not. "I didn't think anyone would care." Keanu looked at him, heart aching with the memory. "But you still gave it to me." The boy shrugged. "Something told me to." They both smiled. Keanu took a breath, glancing at the painting again. "When I was younger, I felt invisible too. Not always, but enough to believe it sometimes." The boy looked up, surprised. "Yeah," Keanu said, "even in big crowds, even with people around, you can be famous, successful, and still feel like no one really sees you." The boy was quiet for a while, then said, "But now you don't?" "Not as much," Keanu answered. "Not since you." The boy tilted his head. "Why me?" "Because you reminded me what it means to be present, to really look, to listen, and to act, even when you're scared." He ruffled the boy's hair gently. "You helped me remember who I want to be." The boy leaned into him slightly, resting his shoulder against Keanu's side. "Do you think I'll remember all this when I'm older?" the boy asked. "I hope so," Keanu replied. "But even if you don't remember the details, you'll carry the feeling. You'll remember being seen, being safe, and maybe You'll pass that on to someone else someday." The boy nodded slowly. "I want to help kids like me." "You will," Keanu said. "You already are." The porch light flicked on above them as the sky faded into soft purples and oranges. The foster mother called from inside, saying it was time to get ready for dinner. The boy stood, then paused and looked back at Keanu. "Will you come next year too?" Keanu smiled. "I'll come every year you want me." The boy grinned and ran back into the house, his laughter trailing behind him. Keanu remained seated for a moment, staring at the fading horizon. He had gone into that alley weeks ago, thinking he was following instinct. Now he realized it had been something more, something rooted in his own pain, his own loneliness. And by helping that boy, he had patched something long torn inside himself. He stood, stretched, and looked once more at the painting under his arm. Two figures, a sunbeam, a quiet hill. He hadn't just saved the boy from the dark, he had walked with him into the light. The morning light spilled gently through the wide window panes of Keanu's living room. The house was quiet, peaceful, filled with the soft hum of stillness. Outside, a breeze stirred the trees and birds chirped somewhere in the distance. But inside, all of Keanu's attention was fixed on the painting propped against the far wall. It had been a few days since the birthday visit. He hadn't unpacked the gift right away. Something about it felt sacred, personal, and he wanted to wait for the right moment. That moment arrived unexpectedly, as most important ones do. He had just finished his morning coffee and walked past the still-wrapped bundle leaning beside the bookshelf. Without thinking, he set his cup down and sat on the floor beside it. Carefully, he unwrapped the paper one more time and lifted the painting onto his lap. He had already studied the image dozens of times, the two of them under the open sky, the soft light, the hill. But today, something new caught his eye. In the bottom right corner, barely visible against the soft green of the hill, were tiny letters, written so lightly they almost disappeared into the color. He leaned closer, squinting. His heart skipped. It was a signature. Just a first name. 6 letters, written with shaky but determined strokes. It was the boy's real name. Keanu sat still for a long time, the painting resting against his knees, the silence around him growing deeper. His hands were steady, but inside, something shifted. All this time, the boy had refused to share his name. Not out of rebellion or stubbornness, but out of fear. A name meant being known, being vulnerable. And when the world had tried so hard to erase you, claiming your name felt like inviting danger. But this was something else. This was trust. This was healing. This was identity, reborn through paint and courage. Keanu smiled gently, his eyes clouding. Not tears of sadness, not entirely. There was grief in the layers, yes, but also awe, gratitude, hope. The name was more than ink. It was a declaration. The boy wasn't hiding anymore. Not from the world, not from himself, not even from the painting. He had signed it because he believed it was safe to be seen, because someone had seen him. Keanu stood and walked slowly to the mantel beside the large window. He cleared a space, set the painting upright, and stepped back. The early sunlight streamed through the glass, illuminating the painting's surface. The signature caught the light for just a moment, like a whisper turned into a song. He didn't say anything aloud. He didn't need to. The moment was full enough. He sat in the armchair beside the window and watched the light shift across the canvas. Each brushstroke told a piece of the journey. Each line carried a weight few would ever understand. The boy had walked through fire, through silence, through shadows, and come out, still holding color in his hands. Keanu leaned back, his gaze never leaving the painting. That napkin had been the beginning, and now this painting was the answer. Later that day, Keanu found himself revisiting the memory of the cafe. It was vivid now, clearer than ever. The boy on the curb, the way his head tilted as he sketched, the focus in his eyes, the silence when he handed over the napkin. No words, just the offering of something fragile and full of meaning. Back then, Keanu hadn't known what it meant. Back then, it had just felt like kindness. Maybe fate, maybe coincidence. But now he understood it for what it truly was. A cry for help, hidden in beauty. And somehow, by some divine alignment, Keanu had listened. He walked over to the entry table and opened a drawer. Inside was the original napkin, sealed in a protective sleeve. He lifted it gently, unfolding it with care. The sketch still stunned him. Not just for its detail, but for the emotion it held. The precision, the pain, and on the back, the scribbled message still visible underlined. "Help me, not safe. Please." He traced the edges with his eyes. So much had changed since those words were written. Keanu returned the napkin to its sleeve and placed it back in the drawer. Then he returned to the painting, staring at the signature again. There was power in that tiny corner. More power than most people would ever realize. That name meant survival. It meant agency. It meant the boy had chosen to exist out loud. Keanu placed one hand on the top of the frame and whispered a silent promise. Not just to the boy, but to every unseen child still out there, sketching their cries into paper scraps, hoping someone, somewhere, would notice. He had learned something through all this, something he couldn't unlearn, that the most important things often begin quietly. A drawing handed to a stranger, a few trembling words, a napkin dropped into a pocket and forgotten, until it wasn't. Keanu took out his phone and messaged the NGO director. He wanted to help fund more shelters, not just hidden safe houses, but creative sanctuaries, places where kids like the boy could draw and paint and heal. He wasn't done. He would never be done, because now he understood something profound. You don't have to be loud to save a life. You just have to listen when silence speaks. And sometimes the greatest revolutions start in pencil lines on napkins. That evening, as dusk fell over Los Angeles, Keanu lit a small candle on the windowsill beside the painting. He didn't always do that, only on days that carried weight. The room grew quiet as the sky turned indigo, and in that stillness, the painting glowed. Two figures on a hill, a sky full of light, and in the corner, the tiniest signature, proof that the boy had survived, proof that he had chosen to be known. Keanu leaned back, breathing slowly, letting the moment settle into his bones. The napkin had led him into a storm, but the painting brought him home. The morning was gentle. Sunlight filtered through the branches of slender trees that lined the path of the quiet downtown park. Keanu walked slowly, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, breathing in the stillness of the moment. Joggers passed, dogs barked in the distance, and the wind rustled leaves overhead. Yet, despite the movement around him, everything inside Keanu felt unusually still. This wasn't just another morning stroll. It was reflection. Each footstep echoed with meaning. His mind wandered back to the first time he had walked down that same cafe street. The napkin, the boy, the sketch. What if he hadn't looked across the street? What if he hadn't paused? That boy might still be trapped in darkness, his voice erased before it could grow strong. That thought never left him. All it had taken was a few extra seconds to notice, to care, to listen. Keanu paused beside the low black iron fence that circled the playground. He rested his arms on it, watching the children play. Their laughter rose into the morning air, full of life, energy, innocence. A small boy in red chased a girl with pigtails across the wood chips, both of them giggling. He smiled faintly. That could have been him. That could have been the boy. Somewhere, in a safe backyard far from the city's edges, that same boy, once too scared to say his name, was sketching the world as he wanted it to be. Not the one he'd escaped, but the one he believed could still exist. A world of safety, of visibility, of dreams made real through color. That boy had given Keanu a gift he hadn't expected. Perspective, clarity, and maybe even healing. Because the truth was, Keanu hadn't just helped save a child, that child had returned something to him too. Something buried long ago, when he'd learned to walk past pain because he didn't know how to stop and see it. When being unnoticed felt easier than being vulnerable. But not anymore. Now he saw. And once you see, you can't unsee. Keanu continued walking along the curved pathway of the park, taking his time. A couple on a bench fed birds. A mother adjusted her baby's hat. A teenager practiced guitar beneath a willow tree. Every life had weight. Every face carried a story. The world was overflowing with quiet urgencies, with people waiting for someone to pause, to ask, to care. That single napkin sketch had revealed an entire network of cruelty and a deeper reservoir of courage, all because a stranger noticed. He reached a bench in the center of the park and sat down, the sun warming his back. And for a while he said nothing. He just watched the world, watched it move, watched it live, and slowly an idea stirred in him. Quiet, but firm. What if more people paused? What if they chose not to look away? Keanu pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. It wasn't the napkin. That was safely stored away. This was a photocopy of the boy's last painting, the one given to him on his birthday. He'd made a few prints, but he always kept one with him, tucked into his coat like a silent reminder. He unfolded it slowly and studied the image. Two figures, hand in hand, standing on a grassy hill under a blue sky. The smaller figure held a sketch pad. The taller one held nothing, but stood as if guarding the moment. The boy had painted them both in a beam of sunlight, their faces turned toward the horizon. And in the corner, his name, his real name. Keanu smiled softly. It still made his chest tighten every time he saw that signature. It wasn't just art. It was survival turned into color. It was proof that silence had been broken and that healing had begun. The boy hadn't needed to scream. He hadn't needed to make noise. All he had needed was to be seen and believed. How many others were out there? How many napkins were being handed to empty sidewalks? How many children were slipping away, their stories folded into dumpsters and alleyways? He folded the paper again and slipped it back into his jacket. Then he looked up. The wind moved through the trees again. Sunlight flickered between branches. Across the grass, more children had joined the playground. More laughter, more chaos, more life. He thought of the boy, now safe, now growing, now learning to trust light again. And he realized that this moment, this quiet moment of watching, might be the most important thing he could ever do. Because this wasn't just a park. It was a promise, a reminder of what was at stake. Keanu stood from the bench and began walking again. The path sloped gently toward the pond, and ducks floated lazily in the water. On the other side of the pond, a mural covered a brick wall. Bold colors, a giant sun, and children holding hands beneath it. It reminded him of one of the boy's earliest sketches. He paused beside the edge of the pond and looked out over the water. Then he turned, slowly, as if addressing the world. "If you had the power to change one life today," he said quietly, "would you pause long enough to see it?" He let the words linger in the air. Then he walked forward, step by step, into the light. The scene held. The pond shimmered. The laughter in the distance continued. And for a moment, the world felt suspended between silence and meaning. Keanu didn't look back. He didn't need to. What mattered was ahead. What mattered was the choice everyone has, every single day. to walk past or to pause, to overlook or to reach out. The boy had taught him that, without speaking a word. He left the park and turned down a quiet street. On the corner was a community arts center, one he had recently started supporting. Inside were easels, sketch pads, clay wheels, and bright paint-streaked tables, a sanctuary for kids who needed to tell stories they couldn't say out loud. He didn't go in. He just smiled as he passed by, knowing more stories were unfolding there. He walked until the street grew wider and the morning haze lifted into sunlight. People hurried past, some on phones, some with groceries, some in suits. The city moved as it always did. But somewhere in it was a boy who once thought he was invisible. And now he was an artist. Now he had a future. All because someone looked. Keanu reached into his pocket one more time and felt the edge of the folded copy of the painting. His fingers rested on it for a beat longer than usual. Then he continued walking, toward whatever came next, toward the next sketch, the next voice, the next child waiting to be seen. And now, as the screen fades and the story ends, it's your turn. If this story moved you, let it move you to action. Have you ever seen someone invisible to the world? Tell us in the comments. What kind of story do you want to see Keanu in next? Share your ideas below. Like if this story moved you. Subscribe for more incredible stories just like this one. Let's build a world where no napkin sketch goes unnoticed and no cry for help goes unanswered. Because sometimes the smallest gesture becomes the spark that saves everything.